Celestine Ward stood silently before the cold, black-rimmed mirror in the 42nd floor restroom, the place where contract applicants came to wash their hands before interviews. Beneath the pale flicker of fluorescent light, the reflection staring back wasn't the CEO of Ward Stratagems, but a woman in a wrinkled white blouse, an unbranded grey skirt, and scuffed flats. No jewelry, no watch, no sign of power. She tilted her head, adjusted her collar, smoothed her hair, and closed a worn notebook, as if double-checking whether she appeared invisible enough. Next to her, a skinny young woman with tired eyes fumbled with the zipper of her purse. She looked up, caught Celestine's gaze in the mirror, and softly said, "Your shoelace is a little loose." Celestine bent down, calmly retied it, and offered a slight nod in thanks. The two stood there without speaking anymore. They had something in common. Both had stepped into this building without the armor of connections. Just then, the inner door swung open. Two women entered high heels, tapping confidently against the polished stone floor. One, wearing red lipstick and a designer dress, faced the mirror and spoke with a nonchalance that was clearly meant to be overheard. "My cousin's in charge of the final hiring round. Here, a stranger can get cut over a tiny mistake, while the familiar ones, all it takes is a nod." The other laughed, snapped her lipstick shut, and replied, "What matters is knowing your place. They don't want talent, they want silence and obedience." Celestine kept her head bowed, her eyes briefly meeting the young woman's beside her. No judgment, no panic, just a fleeting moment of quiet enough to understand the game on the 88th floor had been rigged long before it began. And in that game, integrity wasn't part of the qualifications. Celestine took a deep breath and walked out of the restroom. She didn't need lipstick. She didn't need connections. And today, she hadn't come looking for a chance. She came to find out why. So many deserving people had never made it past that door. The glass doors slid open almost soundlessly, yet the entire room fell silent. Every eye turned toward the person who had just entered, not out of curiosity, but from habit, the kind of reflex worn into those who are used to sizing others up with a single glance. Celestine stepped in quiet and composed. No high heels, no expensive perfume, no designer labels, just scuffed flats, a worn canvas bag, and a notebook pressed close to her chest, like an item no one would ever suspect held any weight. The interview room gleamed luxurious, like an international boardroom. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooked the Hudson River and the distant city skyline. A long table topped with Italian ebony reflected the ceiling lights like a calm lake. 8 high-end chairs were already occupied. Everyone was impeccably dressed, their eyes sharp, their posture precise, trained to dazzle in the upper echelons of corporate life. Celestine chose the last seat at the far corner of the table, the one no one noticed, the one no one wanted. She sat down quietly, as if she'd done it 100 times before. No one knew she had once sat at the head of this very table, the seat reserved for decision-makers. Today she sat at the end, to see which of them believed they had the right to decide who was worthy of staying. A soft scraping of a chair broke the stillness, followed by a sweet voice laced with condescension from the left. "Looks like you're in the wrong room. This is the strategy candidate group, not for interns or assistants." A light chuckle rose from the opposite side. A young man in a tailored suit and designer tie leaned back with a smirk. Maybe she's here to take notes for the meeting or fetch drinks for the panel. None of them knew that Celestine had once approved the architectural plans for this very room. She opened her notebook, flipped past the first page, crowded with scribbles, and stopped at a blank one. The fountain pen moved across it in a slow, steady stroke, not rushed, not forceful, but deliberate. The woman sitting closest, Vivian Langford, perfect hair, flawless red lipstick, eyes cold as blades, turned to look at her. She smiled, the kind of smile worn by someone who knows the odds are already in her favor. There's no need to take notes. The recruitment team only interviews candidates who meet the standards. And you don't exactly look the part. Celestine didn't respond. Her hand kept writing. Her eyes didn't lift. Her expression didn't change. She wasn't writing to remember. She was writing not to forget. Every word, every glance, every calculated silence. No one in that room realized the woman they were dismissing was the one actually evaluating them. And this time, she wasn't looking at resumes, test scores, or KPI reports. She was watching how they treated someone they thought had no value. The silence in the room had shifted. It was no longer the awkward stillness of strangers. It had morphed into something damp and heavy, reeking of quiet compromises as each candidate began murmuring to one another as if an unspoken hierarchy had already been established. Those seated near the center spoke louder. Those at the edges tried to smile at the right moments. And the woman at the end of the table, with her battered notebook, continued taking notes with such calm persistence that it made others visibly uncomfortable. When an assistant brought in drinks, Vivian casually pointed towards Celestine and said, half joking, half cutting, "Give her a soda, will you? Looks like she needs a little sugar to stay awake." The young staffer hesitated. He glanced at Celestine, then back at Vivian. A second of indecision. Then he nodded and gently placed a cold can beside the open notebook. Celestine nodded slightly, saying nothing. She reached out to pick it up, but before her fingers could touch the can, Vivian's elbow accidentally or not swiped across the table. The soda tipped, clinked against the edge with a soft metallic clack, and then burst open like a cold slap against the suffocating air of the room. Liquid sprayed everywhere. A long, dark stain spread across the front of Celestine's white blouse. Her notebook caught the spill along its edge, the pages warping instantly, ink bleeding like veins beneath the ceiling light. Vivian feigned surprise, covering her mouth, eyes wide with faux shock. "Oh dear, how clumsy of me. But well, thank goodness, it wasn't anything important, right?" The room laughed. Not loudly, but just enough to form a soft, poisonous wave of sound, like a pat on the head delivered from someone who thinks you're drowning. A few phones were lifted discreetly. Several pairs of eyes met silently, agreeing. Yes, that was funny. Celestine didn't stand. She didn't flinch. She simply closed her notebook, dabbed her hand dry with the already soaked grey skirt, and resumed her seat, her gaze fixed on the blank screen at the front of the room. No furrowed brows, no explanations, no pleading looks. She didn't need to, because she hadn't come here to be accepted. She had come to see their faces when they thought they were on top. And now they had shown her everything. The conference room door didn't slam open, but the sound of it echoed like a blade slicing through the thick silence in the room. Laughter died instantly. All eyes turned to the woman who had just stepped in, a perfectly tailored black suit, a presence so composed it was cold. No introduction was needed. Every candidate knew her name, Margot Reyes, Global Head of Human Resources at Ward Stratagems, a woman rumored to wield the kind of power where a single nod from her could alter someone's career by sunset. She didn't linger on anyone for long, just swept her eyes over the room as if ticking names off an invisible list. But when her gaze landed on Celestine, something shifted, subtly, almost imperceptibly. No one understood why they suddenly sat a little straighter in their chairs. But one thing was far from subtle. Margot's eyes. She didn't look surprised. She looked like someone recognizing a truth that had been present all along. Not the recognition of a stranger, but of something unspoken, finally stepping into the light. No one noticed the slow blink, but Celestine did. And that was enough. Margot walked to the head of the table, opened her iPad, and looked up. Her voice was calm, clear, and layered with the kind of authority that never needed to be loud. Thank you all for arriving on time. Before we begin, I have just one simple question. She paused for a second, then turned her head toward the far end of the table to the white blouse still drying under the sharp stain of soda. Are you all right? It seems someone spilled a drink on you. The room turned colder by a few degrees. No one moved. No one laughed. No one offered an excuse. Only quiet breaths and shifting eyes flicking between Margot and Celestine. Celestine raised her head. Her gaze was calm, in the kind of way that made people nervous. She nodded, her voice soft, but cuttingly clear. I'm fine. It's nothing. Margot didn't press further, but something shifted in her face. Her lips tightened ever so slightly. Her eyes stopped focusing on individuals. She looked at the entire room, as if something had just been confirmed without needing to be said. Thank you. Then let's begin. She placed the iPad on the polished ebony table, but did not open any files. And the room, once so sure it was the center of everything, began to feel like it had mistakenly sat at a chessboard without knowing who was moving the pieces. Margot didn't open a single file. She didn't ask about experience. She didn't request presentations. She didn't mention the global branding campaigns everyone had prepped so eagerly to flaunt. She simply looked at each person in turn, as if waiting for them to remove their masks without needing to be asked. Vivian began to feel uneasy. She adjusted her posture, forced a smile, as though taking initiative. Shall we introduce ourselves? Margot tilted her head slightly, her eyes never leaving Celestine. No need. I think we already know more than enough. Julian, the man who had laughed at Celestine, frowned. He glanced at Vivienne, leaned toward her, and whispered, his voice no longer laced with confidence. What the hell is going on? Vivienne didn't respond. She was too busy watching Margot and Celestine. Something was off. The woman they had assumed to be a logistics staffer, or a candidate rejected in a prior screening, was still sitting there, still silent. But the entire room now seemed to orbit around her, not because she demanded attention, but because every glance had begun to avoid her, as if everyone was suddenly wondering, what did we miss? And then Margot tapped her iPad once. The large screen behind her lit up. No graphs, no intro slides, just a photograph. Celestine Ward, wearing a deep navy suit, was shaking hands with the chairman of Ward Stratagems at the CEO appointment ceremony 3 weeks ago. Below the image, a single line of text, thin, sharp as a blade, CEO, Celestine Ward. No one said a word. No one dared breathe too loudly. No one knew what to do with their hands anymore. A few mouths parted slightly as if to ask something, but no words made it past their throats. Julian clenched the arms of his chair. Vivienne sat bolt upright like someone who'd just been stabbed in the back. Margot didn't smile. She didn't emphasize. She wasn't triumphant. She simply spoke calm, steady, almost gentle. Today, we're not interviewing anyone. The only person with the authority to decide anything in this room is the CEO of the company. And in that moment, every eye turned to Celestine. But this time, not to judge her, to plead. Celestine stood up. No one asked her to. No introduction was needed. She didn't say, "If I may," or "Thank you, esteemed panel." She simply rose as if the room had been built for this exact moment. From her canvas bag, she pulled out the old notebook edges, still wrinkled and damp from soda. She flipped to a specific page, then looked up. Her gaze circled the room slowly, without rush-meeting faces that were now pale or turned downward to avoid hers. I didn't come here to apply for a position. I came to confirm a suspicion that our recruitment process designed to find talent has become a filter for those who know how to stay silent and stand in someone else's shadow. No one responded. No one dared. Celestine glanced down at the page. Her hand rested on the first line of text. This is the list of people I will never allow onto my team. Not because you lack talent, but because you lack integrity. She read each name, each position applied for, each word she had recorded. No one interrupted. No one had the courage to. A few clutched the edge of the table. Someone shook their head gently, unclear whether in regret or fear. Vivian sat still. She didn't smile anymore. Her hand pressed over the dry soda stain on the table, as if trying to erase a truth everyone had already seen. Julian stared down at his shoes, as though they were the only things left that hadn't spoken. Celestine looked up directly at Vivian, not with anger, not with coldness, but with a silence so sharp it was merciless. I used to think power came from the ability to make decisions, but I was wrong. Real power comes from knowing when to stay silent and when to speak, especially when no one else dares. She closed the notebook. The sound, dry and precise, snapped through the air. Like the final door slamming shut, the room fell deathly silent. No one stood. No one dared breathe too loudly. The ones who had laughed the loudest were now the ones sinking deepest into their seats. Vivian clenched her hands on her lap, her gaze vacant, stripped of the confidence and pride that once radiated from her. The designer blazer on her shoulders could no longer hide the trembling underneath. Julian kept his head bowed, staring fixedly at his shoes, as if trying to avoid his own reflection in the polished ebony table. Another candidate quietly closed their folder hands, slightly shaking, no longer intending to present anything at all. No one offered an apology. No one tried to explain. But in that silence, everyone understood one thing with painful clarity: the words they had spoken, the things they had done, the laughter they had shared, had now become the clearest evidence for why their names had been crossed out without a single interview. Celestine said nothing more. She stepped away from the conference table, each step slow but steady. No one walked her out, but everyone watched her go. No one tried to stop her, but all of them knew they would never forget the way she left. The elevator doors opened. Celestine stepped in. No one followed. No one had the courage to press a button beside her. The doors closed slowly, reflecting the faces of those still standing there, unsure whether to leave or remain seated. In her hand, the notebook was now dry. The pages, stained with soda, now bore the truest marks of that morning arrogance, prejudice, and a truth no one could ignore anymore. There were no thankful glances, no applause, but from the moment those doors shut, everyone understood this woman didn't need validation, because her silent presence alone had forced an entire room to confront itself. The next morning, the conference room on the 88th floor was cleaned earlier than usual. Chairs were straightened with care. The screen was dark, no more profiles being presented. But something had changed forever. In the elevators, in the hallways, even inside meetings, voices were lowered, ears were opened more, and people hesitated before judging someone by appearance alone. No one mentioned Celestine's name aloud, but every eye turned to the CEO's chair when new decisions were announced. She didn't need to explain. She only needed to lead. And this time, the entire company followed, not because of her title, but because none of them ever wanted to misjudge the woman with the worn notebook again. She had entered that room as someone invisible. But when she left, she carried with her what true power always leaves behind: a quiet, irreversible change. Celestine didn't come to find the right candidates, she came to uncover the truth, and she found it not through resumes, but through how people treated someone they believed to be no one. She didn't just expose a broken system, she reminded us that sometimes people aren't inherently cruel. They've just been given too many chances to do the wrong thing. If you've ever been underestimated or witnessed injustice hidden behind polished smiles, leave a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Toch Story for more powerful stories that will make you believe again in quiet justice and the strength of truth.